1427, January 18, 1944. The village of Verbky, eastern Ukraine, stood frozen under a white crust of wind-packed snow. Smoke drifted low between shattered huts, flattened by artillery 2 days earlier. At the edge of the village, an M4A2 Sherman sat dead in the open, its diesel engine silent, its exhaust stacks rimmed with ice. Panzergrenadiers were already moving through the tree line to the west, dark figures breaking from cover in short rushes, rifles low, machine guns dragging behind them on slings. Inside the Sherman, the driver struck the starter again. The motor coughed once, like a dying man, then went still. No smoke. No vibration. Nothing. Behind the tank, Guard Sergeant Mikhail Kravtsov knelt in the snow with his gloves off, bare fingers blackened by oil and frostbite scars. He had torn open the engine compartment and was pouring boiling water from a dented canteen directly over the fuel pump housing. Steam burst upward, instantly freezing in the air. Shrapnel cracked into the hull beside him. One fragment tore through the antenna. Another punched into the left track guard and spun away. The Sherman had to move. In less than 5 minutes, German infantry would reach it. Behind them, a Panzer IV Ost-J was already edging forward along the frozen road, its long gun searching for a clear shot. Kravtsov slammed the hatch and shouted for the driver to try again. The starter whined. The engine shuddered once, then went silent. Kravtsov stared at the fuel pump, now coated again in ice. He looked toward the tree line, where the first Panzergrenadiers were already dropping into firing positions. How did one mechanic manage to restart a frozen Sherman while Panzergrenadiers closed in? The answer began 6 hours earlier. At 8:10 that morning, the temperature near Verbky was -24 degrees Celsius. The 1st Guards Tank Army had orders to push west, breaking through German rearguards withdrawing toward the Bug River. The previous week's thaw had turned fields into seas of mud, but a sudden freeze had locked everything solid again, ruts, shell holes, even the bodies left from earlier fighting. The mission was simple in words and brutal in reality. A battalion of the 49th Guards Tank Brigade was to punch through Verbky, seize the road junction beyond it, and hold until rifle units could arrive. The Germans had Panzergrenadiers in the area, reinforced by assault guns from a Stu G3 battery and at least one Panzer IV company rotating through as fire support. For the Soviet tanks, cold was as dangerous as enemy guns. Diesel thickened like glue. Oil stiffened until it barely flowed. Electrical systems lost power. Rubber belts cracked like old leather. The Sherman assigned to Kravtsov's section was an M4A2 Lend-Lease with a twin-diesel General Motors engine. It was reliable by Soviet standards, but cold could kill even good machines. The brigade mechanics had spent all night trying to keep engines warm, burning wood under oil pans, wrapping fuel lines in cloth, heating spare parts in dugouts. Kravtsov had slept 3 hours beside a stove made from an artillery shell casing. He had been a tractor mechanic before the war, trained to keep engines alive in Siberian winters. That was why he had been transferred into tank units in 1942, because he knew cold the way others knew metal. At 9 o'clock, the tanks rolled. The Sherman moved well at first, its tracks grinding over frozen ruts, suspension creaking like an old ship. Inside, the crew spoke little. They could feel the cold even through felt boots and padded jackets. Frost grew along the interior walls, turning breath into crystals. By 10:40, the first shells fell around Verbky. German forward observers had sighted the column. Pack guns opened fire from behind barns and stone walls. 2 T-34s burned before reaching the village edge. The Sherman's crew pushed through smoke and dust, firing high-explosive shells into buildings where muzzle flashes appeared. The engine labored but held. At 11:30, after crossing a shallow frozen stream, the driver felt the engine hesitate. Just a moment. A soft stumble, like a man missing a step. Kravtsov heard it immediately. He leaned close to the engine bulkhead and felt with his palm. The vibration was uneven. He checked the fuel pressure gauge, lower than it should be. Cold was tightening its grip. They kept moving. The Sherman fired again, crushing a machine gun nest in a cellar. But each minute, the engine stumbled more often. At 12:05, as they crossed a small square filled with wreckage and frozen bodies, the engine coughed and died. The tank rolled another 5 meters and stopped. Silence fell inside, broken only by distant gunfire. The driver tried the starter. It spun, but the engine did not catch. Kravtsov opened the rear hatch at once. Cold air rushed in. He touched the fuel pump housing. It was hard with ice. Diesel inside the pump had thickened, unable to flow properly. Without pressure, the injectors would starve. This was not a broken part. It was a frozen one. The crew dragged out canvas covers, wrapped fuel lines, tried to warm them with a small gasoline burner. But the wind tore heat away faster than they could make it. At 12:40, German fire increased. The rest of the Soviet battalion pushed ahead, unable to wait. The Sherman was ordered to stay and guard the rear approach once restarted. But it did not restart. By 13:30, German Panzergrenadiers were reported moving through woods west of the village. A Panzer IV had been sighted supporting them. The Sherman still sat dead. Kravtsov tried everything he knew. He heated the pump with rags soaked in fuel and lit carefully. The flame died in the wind. He poured hot water from cooking pots over the housing. It helped for seconds, then froze again. He began to understand something terrible. The pump was freezing from the inside. Diesel, thickened by cold, was barely moving. Even if he thawed the outside, the inside would freeze again the moment pressure dropped. At 1400 hours, rifle fire began snapping through the village. Panzergrenadiers were close now. Inside the Sherman, the crew loaded armor-piercing and high-explosive shells, ready to fight even if they could not move. But they knew what that meant. A stationary tank was a coffin. Kravtsov stood in the snow, staring at the pump, steam rising uselessly from boiling water. He remembered something from tractor work in the far north, something dangerous, something rarely used. But it would require forcing the engine to turn in a way no manual allowed. And if he was wrong, the engine would not just fail, it could explode. Behind him, German voices were already carrying through the trees. Kravtsov wiped his hands on his trousers, closed the hatch, and told the crew to prepare. He was about to attempt something that could either save the tank, or kill everyone inside. And the Panzergrenadiers were less than 300 meters away. Kravtsov ordered the driver to open the engine access from inside. He climbed halfway into the compartment, shoulders disappearing into steam and smoke. The twin diesel blocks were coated in frost along their upper surfaces, breath from the crew turning to white fog around them. The fuel lines were wrapped in rags, already stiff with ice. The pump itself, mounted low, was a dull gray lump of frozen metal. Kravtsov shouted for every kettle, canteen, and cooking pot in the tank. The loader handed them back through the hatch, sloshing, steam pouring out. Kravtsov poured water directly onto the pump and the metal around it. Steam exploded upward, scalding his wrists. He did not pull away. Inside, the crew listened to rifle fire growing louder. Bullets were snapping off stone and wood around the tank. One round struck the hull with a hollow clang. The driver hit the starter. The engine coughed once. Then nothing. Kravtsov knew now that heat alone would not solve it. The diesel inside the pump was too thick. The pump's internal veins could not push it forward. It was like trying to drink frozen soup through a straw. He remembered an old winter trick from tractors in Yakutia. It was dangerous, unofficial, and never written in manuals. If the pump could not move the fuel, then the engine itself would have to pull it. That meant forcing rotation without the starter, using movement, gravity, and the tracks. But the Sherman was not on a slope. So Kravtsov had to make one. He ordered the driver to disengage and the gunner to rotate the turret toward the village edge. Using the turret's weight, they slowly turned until the tank tilted slightly sideways into a shallow shell crater nearby. It was barely noticeable to the eye, but it gave them a few degrees of incline. Kravtsov then opened a bypass on the fuel line, a small fitting meant only for maintenance. Diesel oozed out like syrup. He filled it with a mixture of hot water and a little gasoline, forcing thinner liquid into the pump chamber. The smell inside the engine bay became sharp and dangerous. He slammed the hatch and shouted for the driver to release the clutch in second gear. The idea was brutal. If the tracks turned even a little, gravity might rotate the engine through the transmission. That rotation could help pull fuel through the frozen pump, just enough to wake it. The driver released. The tank did not move. The engine groaned through the drivetrain, a low metallic protest. The driver tried again, rocking the clutch. The tracks twitched, crushing snow. Kravtsov held his breath. He could feel vibration through the hull. The engine turned half a cycle. Still nothing. Outside, a burst of German machine gun fire stitched across the tank's rear deck. Shrapnel from a nearby impact cut into the snow beside Kravtsov's boots. He did not move. He ordered the crew to try again, harder. The driver dumped the clutch. The tank lurched forward half a meter, then stopped. Inside the engine, something changed. Kravtsov felt it before he heard it, a faint tremor, uneven but alive. He shouted for the starter. The starter whined. The engine coughed. Coughed again. Black smoke spat from the exhaust. Then silence. Kravtsov slammed his fist against the hull. He had felt it, fuel had moved. Just not enough. He ordered the crew to rock the tank again. They did. Back and forth. The tracks bit into frozen ground. The hull groaned. Inside, the engine turned another fraction with each movement. Kravtsov cracked the bypass again and injected more heated mixture. Then he closed it, shouted, and the driver hit the starter. This time the engine coughed twice, harder. A cylinder fired. Then another. The engine shook violently, uneven, like a wounded animal trying to stand. Black smoke poured out in thick clouds. Kravtsov screamed for the driver to hold it, do not stop, do not ease. The engine stumbled, dropped to near silence, then caught again. At that moment, a Panzergrenadier squad broke from the trees barely 200 meters away. They ran low, rifles in hand, one man dragging a light machine gun. The Sherman's engine roared, weak, shaking, but alive. Kravtsov slammed the engine hatch closed and climbed inside. Move, he shouted. The tank lurched forward just as bullets cracked against its side. A grenade bounced off the rear deck and rolled into the snow, exploding harmlessly behind them. The driver forced the engine to keep turning. Every second mattered. If it stalled again, it would never restart. They drove straight through a line of shrubs, crushing branches under steel. The gunner fired high explosive into the tree line. A German machine gun fell silent. But the engine was not healthy. It knocked and shook, fuel still thick, oil still stiff. The temperature gauge crept upward dangerously uneven. Kravtsov stayed half-turned in his seat, listening to every sound. Behind them, the Panzer IV rolled into view between houses, its gun swinging toward the Sherman. The Sherman could not outrun it. The driver steered into a narrow lane between stone buildings. The Panzer IV fired. The shell smashed into a wall just behind them, sending bricks flying. The Sherman's engine faltered again. Kravtsov felt it. He shouted for more speed. The driver pushed. The engine sputtered, lost a beat, then caught again, coughing black smoke like a sick man. They burst out of the village into open fields where Soviet rifle units were already advancing. The Germans, seeing infantry and tank fire ahead, hesitated. The Sherman did not. It crawled, not fast, but alive. Only after they reached friendly lines did Kravtsov allow the driver to slow. The engine idled roughly, shaking the hull. Kravtsov climbed back into the engine bay. The pump was still coated with ice, but now warm from internal flow. Diesel was finally moving. He wrapped it again in cloth and ordered a fire lit beneath the engine to keep it alive. That night, mechanics from the brigade came to look at what he had done. They found the bypass filled with a dangerous mixture, fuel lines scarred by heat, and signs of forced rotation through the transmission. They wrote it down. Not as an official method, but as something that had worked once, under fire, in impossible cold. And they noted the name of the man who had dared to try it. Guard Sergeant Mikhail Kravtsov. They also noted something else. If the engine had turned even one cycle too fast, the gasoline vapor could have ignited inside the pump. The tank would have become a torch. And no one inside would have lived. The report from that evening was brief, written in pencil on damp paper. It listed ammunition used, losses, and mechanical status. In the margin, next to the Sherman's number, someone added a note: fuel pump frozen. Restarted by forced rotation through transmission, gravity assisted. Method unsafe. No further explanation. The fighting around Verbky continued through the night. German counterattacks probed the village edge, but Soviet riflemen held, supported by tanks that could still move. The Sherman remained running because Kravtsov and two assistants fed wood under its engine every hour, guarding the small fire like priests over a fragile flame. At dawn on January 19, the temperature was still below -20. The engine started more easily now, but only because it had never been allowed to go cold again. Kravtsov slept sitting against the hull, boots steaming as ice melted off them. 3 days later, after the brigade advanced another 15 kilometers, a political officer interviewed several crewmen for a morale bulletin. He wrote about courage under fire, about not abandoning a tank, about defeating German infantry. He did not understand engines. So he did not mention the pump, the gravity trick, or the danger of ignition. He wrote only that a mechanic restored movement to a tank under enemy fire. Kravtsov did not correct him. In February, near the southern Bug River, another Sherman froze in similar cold. A young mechanic tried to copy what he had heard. He forced rotation without heating the pump first. The engine seized. The tank never moved again. After that, the brigade commander issued an order: no forced rotation restarts without senior mechanic approval. The trick was dangerous, unreliable, and depended on conditions that rarely aligned. Yet the story spread anyway, passed quietly among mechanics like a forbidden prayer. Most never used it. Some tried. Few succeeded. In spring, mud replaced cold. New failures came: tracks jamming, clutches slipping, engines drowning in filth. Kravtsov solved those too, but none carried the same risk as that frozen day at Verbky. Years later, in 1961, a historian working in a military archive found a faded maintenance log. It listed a Sherman in January 1944, location, Verbky. The note about forced rotation caught his eye. He searched for more records. There were none. No photographs. No official report. No award citation tied to it. Only one line in pencil. Some historians said the note was exaggerated. Others said the method was impossible, that a frozen pump could not be overcome that way. A few said it could work, but only in very narrow conditions: incline, partial thaw, correct gear, enough fuel pressure to catch. They argued in journals, in classrooms, in late-night discussions. No one could prove it. But veterans who had served with the 1st Guards Tank Army told the story quietly in old age. They spoke of a Sherman that came back to life while Germans were already running toward it. They said the mechanic's hands were burned and frozen at the same time. They said he did not speak for hours afterward. They did not know exactly how he did it. Only that the tank moved when it should have died. And that sometimes, in war, survival depended not on orders or manuals, but on men who were willing to break them when there was no other choice. For every machine that ever moved again against all reason, remember the hands that made it happen.